The cantina's dim lights flickered across Velthar's scarred exoskeleton as he nursed his third drink. The amber liquid burned down his throat, but not as much as the memories. Across the metal table sat a young reporter, recording device gleaming between them like a tiny star. The kid looked fresh out of the academy, his green skin still bright, unmarked by war. "Tell me about the human wars," the reporter pressed. Leaning forward with eager eyes, Velthar's mandibles clicked nervously. The sound echoed in the nearly empty cantina. Outside, the space station hummed with life. But in here, only the ghosts of the past kept him company. "You don't want to know, youngster. The galaxy needs to hear these stories. The official records are too clean, too sanitized. People need to understand what really happened out there." Velthar stared at his drink, watching the bubbles rise to the surface. Each one reminded him of the escape pods he'd watched explode in the cold void of space. The official records are lies. Pretty lies to help people sleep at night. "Then, tell me the truth." The old veteran's compound eyes shifted, scanning the cantina. As Ephraim Trader sat in the corner, his tentacles wrapped round a data pad. Two crystalline beings shared a table near the viewport, their bodies catching the starlight. None of them had been there. None of them had seen what humans could do when their backs were against the wall. "I was sergeant back then," Velthar said finally. "Thought I was tough. My unit, the 47th Assault Division. We'd conquered 12 worlds without breaking a sweat. The methane breathers of Kepler-9 surrendered after one orbital bombardment. The Silicon Lords of the asteroid belt begged for mercy when we showed up with our dreadnoughts." He took another sip, the alcohol helping to steady his nerves. "Humans were supposed to be easy. Soft pink things with no natural weapons. No claws, no armor plating, no poison sex. Just meat and bone and order." The reporter's eyes gleamed with interest. "But they weren't easy. Easy." Velthar's laugh was bitter. "Kid, they were the opposite of easy. They were nightmares with legs." Outside the viewport, a cargo ship drifted past, its running lights blinking in the darkness. Velthar remembered other ships, other lights, the flash of pulse cannons, and the silent explosions of dying vessels. The Coalition sent 3 full battle fleets to human space. 15,000 ships, carrying 2 million soldiers. We had plasma, cannons that could crack planets, shields that could stop asteroid impacts, and AI systems that could calculate 1 million battle scenarios in seconds. And the humans, they had something we didn't understand then. Something our computers couldn't calculate. Velthar's voice dropped to a whisper. They had the ability to turn everything into a weapon. Even themselves. The young reporter shifted. In his seat, the recording device capturing every word. "What do you mean?" After a long pause, Velthar's voice dropped to a whisper. "Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you. It started on Earth Colony World Harmony 7. We thought we'd won." The humans had gone silent for 3 days. The cantina seemed to grow colder as Velthar spoke. The lights dimmed further, casting long shadows across the metal walls. In those shadows, the veteran could see the faces of his fallen comrades. Harmony 7 was supposed to be a farming world. Peaceful. They grew some kind of grain that turned purple under their sun. Pretty place, if you like that sort of thing. Rolling hills, clean air. No military installations. Sounds harmless enough. That's what we thought. Our intelligence said 50,000 civilians. Mostly farmers and their families. No standing army. No orbital defenses. No starfighters. Just people trying to make a living on the edge of human space. Velthar's clawed hand trembled slightly as he reached for his drink. The tremor wasn't from age. It was from remembering the first time he'd seen what humans could become when they had no choice but to fight. We sent down a message first, standard procedure. Surrender now, and we'll treat you according to galactic law. Resist, and face the consequences. The response came back in 3 minutes. What did they say? Nothing. Just silence. Dead air. We tried again the next day. Same thing. By the third day, we figured they'd given up. Maybe evacuated. Maybe just accepted their fate. The reporter leaned closer, but they hadn't. No. Velthar's voice was barely audible now. They were planning. That's when I first met Captain Kim Tai-ho. He taught us that silence doesn't mean surrender. It means they're getting ready to show you something you'll never forget. The old veteran's eyes grew distant, seeing not the cantina, but a purple-skied world where everything had gone wrong. Where he'd learned that the most dangerous thing in the galaxy wasn't a weapon or a monster. It was a human with nothing left to lose. 50,000 humans lived on Harmony 7. Velthar continued, his voice growing shakier with each word. When we landed, the settlement was empty. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Just gone. The dropships had touched down in the main square at dawn. Velthar remembered the purple grass swaying in the alien breeze. The two suns casting strange double shadows across the abandoned buildings. His unit of 40 soldiers spread out in standard formation, plasma rifles charged and ready. The houses looked normal, he said, staring into his drink, breakfast still on the tables. Children's toys scattered in the yards, hover cars parked, neatly in driveways. It was like everyone had just vanished into thin air. The reporter shifted forward, but something felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. Our scanners showed no life signs. But the settlement's power grid was still running. Street lights were on. The fountain in the center square was still bubbling. Even the automated farming machines were working the fields outside town. Velthar's mandibles clicked as he remembered walking through those eerily quiet streets. His squad had been veterans of a dozen campaigns, but something about the silence made even the toughest soldiers nervous. Commander Zixtel ordered us to spread out and search every building. Standard sweep pattern. We'd done it 100 times before on 100 different worlds. Should have been routine. He paused, his breathing ragged as the memories came flooding back. My unit took the residential district. 20 houses, all identical. White walls, red roofs, little gardens in front. I sent Private Kelvin to check the first house while the rest of us covered the street. The veteran's voice dropped to barely a whisper. That's when Staff Sergeant Park Jin-woo made his move. He'd been hiding in the water recycling system for 72 hours, breathing through a reed. How is that even possible? Humans can hold their breath longer than any species in the galaxy. But 72 hours. We didn't know they could slow their heartbeat, lower their body temperature, enter some kind of hibernation state. Jinwoo had turned himself into a living statue. Velthar's clawed hands gripped his glass tighter. The first sign of trouble was when Kelvin Escom went dead. Just static. Then we heard the sweat, gurgling sound from inside the house. What happened? Jinwoo had erupted from the floor drain like some kind of underground monster, covered in sewage and slime. But his eyes were clear and focused. He took out Kelvin with a homemade knife carved from recycled plastic. Silent kill. Professional. The cantina seemed to grow colder as Velthar spoke. Outside, a patrol ship drifted past the viewport, its searchlights scanning the darkness. Before we could react, Jinwoo had vanished again, just melted back into the shadows like he was never there. Our thermal scanners couldn't find him. Our motion detectors showed nothing. It was like fighting a ghost. But he was just one human. That's what we thought. We called for a backup and sealed off the area. Figured we'd corner him eventually. That's when Lieutenant Nari emerged from beneath the solar panel array. She'd buried herself alive and waited. Vilthar's voice cracked with the memory. Nari had been underground for 3 days, buried under 2 meters of dirt and rocks, breathing through a network of bamboo tubes. She'd eaten worms and insects to stay alive, collected rainwater in her mouth during the storms. When she finally surfaced, she looked like something from a nightmare, dirt caked in her hair, clothes torn to shreds, fingernails broken and bloody from digging. But she moved like a dancer, fluid and graceful. The reporter's eyes were wide with fascination and horror. How many soldiers did she kill? 3 more before we even knew she was there. Nari had turned the solar panel into a weapon. She'd rewired the power cells to create electrical traps, turned the metal frames into spears, used the reflective surfaces to blind our targeting systems. Vilthar took another drink, his hands shaking now. But the worst part wasn't how they killed us. It was how they appeared and disappeared, like they were part of the planet itself. Where were the other humans? Everywhere and nowhere. Inside the walls of buildings, sealed behind fake panels they'd built in a single night, floating underwater in the retention ponds, using hollow reeds to breathe. Hanging from the undersides of bridges, clinging to metal beams for days. The old soldier's voice became a whisper. Private Kim Duhayan had folded himself inside a ventilation shaft so narrow that our medics said it should have crushed his ribs. But humans can compress their bodies in ways we never imagined. Then there was Corporal Yun Si-woo. He'd climbed inside the grain storage silos and buried himself in thousands of tons of purple wheat. When our soldiers opened the silo to check for hiding spots, he came pouring out with the grain like some kind of harvest demon. Velthar's compound eyes darted round the cantina nervously. They hadn't evacuated. They'd turned invisible. Every human on that world had found a way to hide in impossible places, waiting to strike. Old people, young adults, even teenagers, all of them had become predators. We lost half our battalion to ghosts, 47 soldiers dead or missing. In the first 6 hours, the other half were so terrified they were shooting at shadows and jumping at their own reflections. The veteran finished his drink and signaled for another. That's when we learned the first rule of fighting humans. They don't run from superior forces. They become the environment and wait for you to make a mistake. And the settlement still looked empty when we finally retreated. But now we knew better. 50,000 humans hadn't disappeared. They'd just learned how to become invisible, predators in their own homes. 6 months later, we besieged Firebase Delta. Velthar's eyes grew distant, staring past the cantina walls into memories that still haunted his dreams. Commander Choi Minho had been cut off with his unit for 8 months. No supplies, no reinforcements. The veteran's claws traced patterns on the metal table as he spoke. Firebase Delta sat on top of a mountain peak on the world called Iron Ridge. Strategic position, perfect for monitoring 3-star systems. The humans had built it into the rock itself. Carved tunnels and chambers deep into the mountain. How many humans were trapped there started with 300 by the time we arrived. Our long-range scanners detected maybe 60 life signs. We figured starvation and disease had done most of our work for us. Velthar's mandibles clicked. Softly, the siege lasted for months. We surrounded the base with 12 battle cruisers, cut off all supply routes, jammed their communications, standard procedure. Wait them out, let hunger do the fighting. The reporter leaned forward, but they didn't surrender. Not only did they not surrender, they kept fighting back. Every day, human raiders would slip past our blockade somehow. They'd sabotage our equipment, steal supplies, leave messages carved into the hulls of our ships. The old soldier paused to take another drink. Outside the viewport, a mining vessel drifted past, its massive cargo holds glowing with processed ore. It reminded him of the supply ships they'd lost during that endless siege. The messages were always the same: still here, still fighting. Come and get us. Commander Minho would broadcast them on all frequencies every morning at dawn. His voice never wavered, never showed weakness, even as the months dragged on. What were they eating? How were they surviving? That's what we wondered too. Our bioscanners showed the mountain was completely barren. No wildlife, no vegetation. Nothing edible for kilometers in any direction. The humans should have been dead within weeks. Velthar's voice became quieter, more haunted. When we finally breached their walls, we found something horrifying. Major Kim Yujin had organized the survivors into shifts. They would take turns, staying awake, using pain to fight off starvation and exhaustion. I don't understand. Humans discovered they could use physical pain to trigger adrenaline, keep their bodies functioning even without food. Yujin had them take turns inflicting controlled injuries on each other, pinching pressure points, creating small cuts, applying heat and cold. The reporter's face showed disgust and fascination. They were torturing themselves to stay alive. Not torture, strategy. They'd figured out how to hack their own biology. Privately, some men would stay awake for 3 days straight, keeping watch while the others rested. Then Corporal Park Ji-hai would take over, using pain to stay alert while they finally collapsed. Velthar's compound eyes reflected the cantinas, dim lights. But that wasn't the worst part. The veteran's voice dropped. They'd been burning furniture to cook their own shed skin and hair. Sergeant Yoon Da-yoon had figured out how to make weapons from their own bones. Their own bones? Humans lose pieces of themselves constantly. Dead skin, hair, fingernails. Da-yoon had collected everything over months. She'd weave hair into rope, shape fingernails into arrowheads, even learned to extract and sharpen small bones from their own bodies without causing permanent damage. The old soldier shuddered at the memory. When we broke through their final defensive line, Da-yoon came at us with a spear made from her own rib bone, wrapped in braided hair for grip. She'd carved it out of herself 3 weeks earlier and let the wound heal around a metal rod to maintain the bone strength. That's impossible. We thought so too, but humans can regrow certain bones if they're careful about the extraction. Da-yoon had turned herself into a living weapons factory. She wasn't just fighting us with tools. She was fighting us with pieces of her own body. Velthar's voice cracked with emotion. The smell inside that fortress was indescribable. Burned hair, cooked skin, infected wounds that they deliberately kept open to harvest materials. But the humans weren't acting like they were suffering. They were acting like they'd discovered something wonderful. What do you mean? They were laughing, joking with each other. Lieutenant Cho Hai-wan was teaching the younger soldiers how to braid hair rope while she bled from self-inflicted cuts on her scalp. She treated it like an art class, not a survival technique. The veteran's hands trembled as he continued. Captain Kim Tai-sun had turned his own shed skin into leather armor, not just wearing it, but decorating it. He'd painted patterns on the dried skin, turned his own body's waste into protective gear that actually worked against our energy weapons. How did the siege end? We overwhelmed them with numbers eventually, sent in wave after wave of soldiers, until we finally cornered the survivors in the main command center. But they fought us with pieces of themselves until the very end. Velthar's voice became barely audible. Minho died last, singing some ancient human song. Even as we cut him down, he was smiling. The song was called Amazing Grace, something about being lost and found. His voice was beautiful, clear and strong even with his lungs filling with blood. The cantina fell silent except for the distant hum of the space station's engines. The reporter sat transfixed, recording device still running. The worst part wasn't that they'd turned their own bodies into weapons, Velthar whispered. It was that they'd enjoyed doing it. They'd found joy in the process of survival, pride in their ability to endure anything. When we searched the fortress after the battle, we found their records. Commander Minho had been keeping a diary throughout the siege. The last entry said, "Today, we learned that we are stronger than we ever imagined. Not just our bodies, but our spirits. They can take everything from us except our ability to choose how we respond." The old soldier finished his drink and stared at the empty glass. That's when I realized we weren't fighting an army. We were fighting an idea. The idea that humans could turn anything, even their own suffering, into strength. Velthar's massive hands trembled as he reached for another bottle. The alien's eyes dimmed with memories that refused to fade. Round the cantina, other veterans had gone quiet, sensing the weight of what was coming, the mercy's end. He whispered, his voice like grinding stone. That name still makes my blood run cold. The medical ship had been drifting in the Kepler Nebula for 3 standard months. When the Galactic Defense Force found it, from the outside, it looked like any other hospital vessel. White hull gleaming with red crosses, emergency beacons flashing weakly in the cosmic darkness. But something was wrong. The ship's life signs were erratic, pulsing in patterns that made no sense. Command thought it was a simple rescue mission. Velthar continued, his scarred hide rippling. 200 of us loaded into assault pods. I was squad leader for the Nexus Marines. We'd pulled crews from dozens of derelict ships before. The first sign of trouble came when they breached the airlocks. The ship's atmosphere readings were normal. But the smell hit them like a physical blow. It wasn't the usual scent of recycled air and metal. This was something organic, something alive and rotting at the same time. Dr. Park So Young met them in the main corridor. She looked normal at first glance, a small human woman in a blood-stained medical coat. Her black hair pulled back in a neat bun, but her eyes held a madness that made even battle-hardened Marines step back. "Welcome aboard," she said, her voice unnaturally calm. "I've been expecting you." That's when they saw the crew behind her. Captain Harmensik stood at her shoulder, his uniform torn and stained with substances that shouldn't exist in nature. His breathing was wrong, too shallow, too fast, like he was drowning in air. The bridge officers flanked him, their faces pale and waxy, with dark veins visible beneath their skin. "They're sick," whispered Corporal Janway, the team's medic. "Some kind of plague." But Dr. Park heard him. She smiled, showing teeth that had turned black at the roots. "Sick? No. Corporal, they're perfect. They're my masterpiece." The attack came without warning. Captain Harmensik opened his mouth and breathed out a cloud of greenish vapor that shimmered in the ship's lighting. The Marines closest to him screamed as the toxic fog touched their skin, their armor beginning to dissolve like paper in acid. Velthar grabbed his plasma rifle and fired. But the infected crew moved with inhuman speed. They weren't just diseased. They were something else now. Something that used to be human, but had been twisted into living weapons. Dr. Park had spent months perfecting her plague, Velthar explained, his voice growing hoarse. She didn't want to kill her patients. She wanted to transform them. Each crew member carried a different strain, a different gift of death. The Marines fought their way deeper into the ship. But every corridor brought new horrors. Engineer Nakamura Hiroshi had been transformed into a walking hive of microscopic parasites that ate through metal and flesh with equal hunger. His body was more machine than man now. tubes and wires carrying his poisonous blood to every part of the ship. In the medical bay, they found the worst of all. Nurse Kim Hai-wan hung suspended in a tank of bubbling green fluid, her body connected to dozens of monitoring devices. Her chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, but her eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. "She's been dead for weeks," Dr. Park said proudly, watching from behind a wall of infected guards. "But I keep bringing her back. Each death makes the disease stronger, more adaptable. She's my greatest success." The tank exploded in a shower of toxic glass and fluid. Kim Hai-won's body hit the deck with a wet thud, then began to convulse. Her skin split open, releasing clouds of spores that drifted through the air like deadly snow. "Gas masks," Velthar roared, but it was too late. The spores passed through their filters like they weren't there. Marines began dropping all around him, their bodies twitching as unknown pathogens invaded their systems. The retreat was chaos. Velthar's squad fought their way back to the airlocks, carrying wounded comrades who were already beginning to change. Behind them, Dr. Park's laughter echoed through the ship's corridors, a sound more terrifying than any weapon. "Only 3 of us made it to the escape pods," Velthar said, his voice barely audible now. "The others, they're still up there, part of our collection." The Galactic Defense Force quarantined the entire sector after that. The Mercies and still drifts somewhere in the nebula. A floating tomb of medical madness, and Velthar takes his medicine every day, fighting the microscopic invaders that still live in his blood, waiting for their chance to finish what Dr. Park started. Velthar's full eyes narrowed as he stared into the depths of his empty glass. The cantina had grown deadly quiet, every alien patron leaning forward to catch his next words. Even the bartender's 6 arms had stopped moving, bottles frozen mid-pour. "You want the real truth?" Velthar's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. "The wars didn't end because we were merciful. They ended because we got scared." The massive alien scarred hide rippled with old memories. Round them, the space station hummed with the sound of distant engines and recycling systems, but inside the cantina, time seemed to have stopped. General Lee Dongmin called for a meeting in the neutral zone, said he had something to show us. That would change everything. The Galactic Council thought it was another surrender offer. We were wrong. Velthar's claws scraped against the metal table as he remembered that day. The human general had arrived in a simple transport ship. No weapons, no escorts, just one old man in a worn military uniform, carrying a briefcase that would end the bloodiest war in galactic history. He opened that case and showed us Project Phoenix. At first, we laughed. The humans had been losing for months. Their fleets were scattered, their colonies burning. What could one defeated species possibly show us? The general's holographic display had flickered to life, showing medical records and genetic profiles, thousands of them, all human, all volunteers. But these weren't soldiers in any traditional sense. Private Cho Sang-min had volunteered first. Velthar continued, his voice growing hollow. Young kid, barely out of training, but the humans had done something to him, something that made our greatest weapons look like toys. The hologram showed a thin human boy standing in an empty city block, buildings stretched around. Him, abandoned, but intact. He smiled at the camera, then simply lay down and closed his eyes. What happened next defied every law of physics the Galactic Council understood. The boy's body began to glow, not with heat or electricity, but with something far more dangerous. His cells started breaking apart at the atomic level, releasing energy in patterns that turned matter itself into a weapon. The entire city block simply ceased to exist. erased from reality in a flash of impossible light. One human soldier could take out our largest battleships just by dying correctly, Vilthar said, his voice shaking. But that wasn't the worst part. Colonel Park Ji-hoon had taken the modifications even further. The humans had found a way to make death itself into a delivery system. His body had been altered to carry engineered viruses that would remain dormant until his heart stopped beating. Then they would spread through air and water, turning entire worlds into graveyards within. The demonstration was on a dead planet in the Vega system. Vilthar remembered. The colonel walked into a sealed chamber filled with Nexari prisoners of war. He took a poison tablet and died peacefully in his sleep. Within 6 hours, every living thing on the planet was dead. The viruses spread through the atmosphere, the oceans, even the soil. Nothing survived. Not even the bacteria that should have broken down the bodies. It was death made absolute, final, irreversible. But Admiral Kim Jae-won showed us the true horror. Vilthar whispered. The Admiral had been an older woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She looked more like someone's grandmother than a weapon of mass destruction. But the humans had turned her into something that made the previous demonstrations look like minor accidents. She could poison the quantum foam itself, Vilthar said, watching as several aliens at nearby tables got up and left. Reality would become toxic wherever she died. Space stations, planets. Entire star systems would become uninhabitable for thousands of years. The human general had closed his briefcase and looked directly at the assembled alien commanders. His message was simple and terrifying. Every human civilian, every child, every elderly person had been given these modifications. They called it Project Phoenix because from their deaths would rise humanity's final victory. Kill one human, lose 10 worlds, the general had said calmly. Kill 1,000 humans, lose your entire species. We don't need to win battles anymore. We just need to die in the right places. The Galactic Council had tried to call his bluff. Surely no species would transform their entire population into living weapons. But the humans had already done the unthinkable. They had made peace impossible through war, and war impossible through peace. Vilthar stood slowly, his massive frame casting shadows across the cantina. The peace treaty wasn't their surrender. It was us begging them to please stop making death itself their greatest weapon. He paused, looking down at the reporter who had been listening so calmly to stories that should have driven any sane being to madness. Something was wrong here. Very wrong. You've been awfully quiet through all this, Vilthar said, his hand moving to the plasma pistol at his hip. Most beings would be screaming by now, running for the exits. But you just sit there, taking notes like this is all normal. The reporter looked up from their recording device, smile never wavering. Fear is such an interesting emotion. Don't you think? The way it spreads, the way it changes behavior. What species are you? Vilthar demanded, his full eyes focusing intently on the figure across from him. The reporter's smile widened, showing far too many teeth arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. Does it really matter at this point? The interview is over, and the message has been delivered. Vilthar's blood turned twice as he realized the truth. The psychological warfare had never ended. It had just evolved, taken new forms, found new ways to spread terror across the galaxy. And he had just helped it along. As he backed toward the cantina's exit, Vilthar understood that some wars never truly end. They just find new battlefields in the minds of those who survived them. Retriclod can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.